Hello, friends. I'm Ian Rollins of Rollins TV, and I'd like to put something right out in the open from the very start. I am a geek, and not just your average geek either. I am a Disney geek. Yes, it's true. I am a fully grown, close to 30-year-old male who chooses to believe that it really is a small world after all. I have my reasons for this, of course. I've always had an interest in animation in general, especially animatronics, a term that Disney Imagineers coined themselves. I also grew up during one of the most exciting periods in animated film, known as the Disney Renaissance. But above everything else, I just plain love Disneyland. I don't look at it the way your average tourist does. For me, it is a place of wonder and nostalgia. Walt himself had a hand in many of the attractions that still exist there today. It's a homecoming for me, a mecca for those whose childlike wonder was never crushed by adulthood. It is this hope of discovering a bit of magic that keeps me coming back year after year. But there is another side to the park as well. A side that speaks to the part of me who still believes in things like ghosts and omens. For even though Disneyland is dubbed the happiest place on earth, it still must exist in the realm of reality, where, as we all know, terrible things can occur. And on occasion, there among the castles and the fairies and the flying elephants, death comes to call. It is incidents of this nature that I will convey to you now. Stories you may have never heard of, but that are more real than Mickey himself would even care to admit. It's a zippity-doo-dah dirge for the dead, from the epicenter of happiness itself. I call it Horrific Disneyland.
To all who come to this happy place, welcome. Disneyland is your land. Here age relives fond memories of the past, and here youth may savor the challenge and promise of the future. Disneyland is dedicated to the ideals, the dreams, and the hard facts that have created America, with the hope that it will be a source of joy and inspiration to all the world. Thank you.
Those were the words that welcomed some 1,500 guests on Disneyland's opening day in July of 1955. Since then, people from all walks of life have gone through its hallowed gates with the optimistic prospects of family fun and safe pre-planned adventure. Walt's words from the unveiling of his vision still ring out today, tapped out in telegraph code from a solemn and abandoned-looking booth at the Frontierland station on the Disneyland Railroad line. Out of the countless individuals who enter the park on a given day, it can be safely assumed that not many of them consider it may be one of the last things they ever do. And what for? Disney parks are hands down the most well-maintained theme parks in operation, and they've also set the standards of safety that all other parks strive to live up to. Reverence aside, Disneyland itself has made some unflattering headlines, particularly when safety hazards seem very unlikely and therefore go overlooked. It was an oversight like this that contributed to what is possibly the most tragic and grisly accident on the property. A tragic event that claimed the young life of one of Disney's own cast members. In 1974, Disneyland was considered a safe haven for conservative families to spend some time together away from the rambunctious hippie movement that was sweeping the whole of California. It was this clean-cut and seemingly harmless atmosphere that attracted the attention of a recent high school graduate from Santa Ana named Deborah Gale Stone. Like most young ladies of the time, she had aspirations to continue her education in college. She took initiative to pay her own way by getting a summer job as a hostess at the newly opened America Sings attraction in the Tomorrowland district. Her duties were to basically open the theater doors and lead guests to their seats. Probably not her proudest moment, I'm sure, but sufficient due-paying for a plucky kid who it seemed had all the time in the world to fulfill her dreams. As a sort of Small World version 2.0, America Sings featured a plethora of anthropomorphic animals singing medleys of American-penned songs from the 1800s up to what was then the present day. The attraction featured a rotating network of 6 theaters that revolved around a central stage. Guests would sit down and watch the show while the building made its gradual revolution, visible due to its loud design of deco stripes and circles on the concrete skin outside. What happened next is, as so many of these accounts are, debated from article to article. Whether or not Stone's lack of training or simply a bad step were to blame for what ensued is unknown. But at some point during an intermission on her shift shows, she ended up on the wrong side of the audience revolution mechanism and was crushed to death between the rotating and stationary walls. The machinery was powerful enough to move an entire 3 floors of architecture. As one can imagine, it took a considerable fraction of that impressive torque to mangle Deborah beyond any sort of physical recognition. Co-workers didn't realize what had happened until hours later, when what was left of their departed co-worker was finally found. The attraction was closed for several days, while warning lights and breakaway walls were installed. Safety measures that prevented any incidents right up until the attraction's eventual closure in 1984. However, these precautions came far too late for Deborah Stone, or as various rumors of ghost sightings and horror stories from future cast members have christened her, Disco Debbie. Although ghoulishly tragic, Deborah's death was by all accounts accidental. I personally like to think that the fabled grim specter of death is much more of an artist than us mortals know, and when bizarre and deadly accidents occur, it is really due to the Reaper letting off a little creative steam. An unfortunate event is one thing, but some of us are even spiteful enough to taunt and toy with our own mortality, be it for a thrill, for admiration, or even just to bypass the cost of park admission. Such was the defiant attitude of 19-year-old Thomas Guy Cleveland during a grad night at Disneyland in 1966. When Cleveland showed up that evening at the entrance to the park, heavily intoxicated and with no money for a ticket, he was sternly turned away. Never one to admit defeat, it seems, Thomas managed to sneak by security and then scale a 16-foot-high fence, thereby climbing up onto the monorail track that led into the park. Reports say that his intention was most likely to jump or climb down as soon as he had made it far enough along the track to gain entrance. But as soon as Cleveland took the first step onto the track that evening, events began to unfold very quickly. He was immediately spotted by security, who took off running towards him while shouting hysterically and waving their arms. Convinced that his position perched above the parking lot had made him untouchable, Thomas ignored what he perceived to be more of the same reprimanding he endured earlier. In actuality, the guards were wildly attempting to warn him about the oncoming train that his current location was putting him on a sure collision course with. The monorail was several feet in front of him when Thomas finally got the message. He attempted to clear the speeding threat by climbing down to a fiberglass canopy a foot or so below the track. The clearance, however, wasn't enough for him to avoid being hit by the train's underside. He was caught beneath and dragged along the track before the monorail managed to stop, leaving his body mutilated and dismembered. When news of his demise began to spread around the park, other graduates who knew Cleveland didn't seem at all surprised by his stunt. One was even rumored to go as far as to say, "Oh yeah, that's Tom all over." Disneyland's rides and attractions were designed to appeal to every specific taste and level of excitement. Depending on preference, one can relax and be serenaded by crooning birds and flowers, experience creepy chills and thrills served up by 999 happy haunts, or be whisked through the sprawling landscapes of the park's various coaster rides. Entertainment of this type can surely be found on the craggy snow-capped peaks of the Matterhorn bobsleds. When introduced in 1959, it was the very first tubular steel track roller coaster ever constructed, and remains an icon in the hearts and minds of a well-known group of coaster buffs who call themselves the American Coaster Enthusiasts. It was also a well-frequented area for cast members to unwind, due to the hidden basketball half-court that existed inside the mountain's peak. This imposing mountain isn't all just fun and games, however. Although presented with a fairy tale-like whimsy, the ride itself is just as dangerous as any high-speed coaster. The Matterhorn sits at the top of the Disneyland death count, having claimed the lives of 2 guests in 2 separate incidents. The Matterhorn employs the very same safety announcements and restraints that exist on all Disney rides. Regardless of this, it has, in the past, had to prove itself by putting a guest in their place who dared to challenge its fury. The first victim was a 15-year-old named Mark Maples in 1964. As the ride was ascending to its peak, either Maples or his companion foolishly unbuckled his seatbelt. He then attempted to stand up in order to touch the interior of the mountain. In only a matter of seconds, Maples lost his balance and was tossed to the track below, fracturing his skull and ribs. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition and then died of his injuries 3 days later. 20 years passed until the Matterhorn was once again called upon to do death's bidding. In 1984, Dolly Regine Young of Fremont, California, was killed in an incident remarkably similar to the first. About 2/3 down the mountain, she was thrown from her seat into the path of an oncoming bobsled, with her head and chest becoming pinned beneath its wheels. An examination of her sled revealed that her seatbelt was not fastened at the time of the accident. But since she was sitting alone in the very last car, it is impossible to determine if this was a deliberate action. Dolly's tragic fate, however, was known to a great many when the bobsled that hit her arrived at the unloading area with her feet sticking out from underneath. If perhaps you find that the experience of coasting through the frozen Swiss Alps has gone cold, it's just a short walk up yonder to Frontierland, where sits another Disney-made mass known as Big Thunder Mountain. At Disneyland, this coaster, known technically as Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, replaced a much more sedate ride called Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland. a rather slow-moving attraction that took guests through the habitats of various animatronic animals. Sound familiar? In typical waste-not-want-not Disney fashion, much of the animals and scenery from Nature's Wonderland were removed and incorporated into Big Thunder Mountain when it opened in 1979. The coaster is touted as the fastest railroad in the West, an achievement that sounds impressive, but truth be told, its fastest speed is a staggering 35 miles per hour. Nevertheless, it must be acknowledged as one of the most popular rides in the park, and the site of a major Disney safety snafu.
This here's the wildest ride in the wilderness.
2003 was a difficult year for the railroad, with 3 separate incidents occurring on the ride in the span of only 10 months. It was the first of these accidents that yielded deadly consequences. On September 5, 2003, 22-year-old Marcelo Torres of Gardena, California, was celebrating his birthday at the park with friends and family. Having a certain affinity for roller coasters, he made Big Thunder Mountain the first stop of the day. He was loaded into the first car, directly behind the ornamental locomotive portion attached to the front. He was secured into his seat, a visual ride check was performed, and the train took off once more on what was expected to be a routine run. It wasn't long, though, before things became far from routine. As the train entered a tunnel, an axle came loose from the locomotive in the front of the train and jammed against a brake section, causing the locomotive to become airborne and hit the ceiling of the tunnel. The locomotive then fell on top of the first passenger car, crushing Torres and injuring 10 other guests as well. Torres later died after succumbing to internal injuries. After the accident, it was clear that Disney alone was responsible. An extensive investigation was conducted, and the cause of the accident was determined to be improper maintenance. Specifically, a mechanical failure, which occurred due to omissions during a maintenance procedure. Fasteners on the left side guide wheel on the floating axle of the locomotive were not tightened and safetied in accordance with specifications, causing it to tear loose from the axle. A tragic occurrence that could have been prevented if the proper care had been taken. Disney endured a period of muckraking media coverage at this point, and the resort saw a massive drop-off in attendance. It wasn't until after some serious apologies and a hefty lawsuit that Disney was able to repair its family-friendly image. From all that I've seen, having visited the park at all points of the year, there is nothing that compares to the Yuletide magic that is Christmas time at Disneyland. From the spectacular decorations to the festive reimagining of popular rides. But the true highlight by far is the annual candlelight ceremony and processional that has taken place every Christmas since 1958. A coveted spot in the processional choir is something which every Disney cast member vies for. It's a kind of fantastic display that only Disney could pull off. Designed to be a completely immersive experience, Christmas time at Disneyland has filled millions upon millions of guests with a holiday spirit that can only be overshadowed by some sort of bizarre and tragic incident. And it was on Christmas Eve of 1998 that an incident such as this took place. The sailing ship Columbia has been a trademark of Disneyland since the very beginning. A complete replica of the Columbia Rediviva, the first ship to circumnavigate the globe. It was the first three-masted windjammer to have been built in the United States in over 100 years when it was constructed in 1958. Running all throughout the day, its passengers embark upon a scenic 12-minute journey around the rivers of America. Guests wait for the 84-foot-tall ship, which departs every 25 minutes inside a sheltered area called Frontier Landing, located in the Frontierland section of the park. The waiting area is made to resemble a real dock, with cargo deliveries. At the entrance are displayed various historic United States flags. It was in this stylized queue that 33-year-old Luan Phi Dawson and his family were anxiously waiting to board the ship. Dawson, a programmer for the Microsoft Corporation, had come to the park that day in order to celebrate the lives of his loved ones and to introduce his young grandchild to what was called the happiest place on Earth. They waited patiently in line while the ship was filled and prepared to set sail, anticipating going aboard when it once again came back to the dock. The ship's captain gave the signal, and the Columbia lurched forward in order for the rope securing it to the dock to be untied. The normal tie line, an inelastic hemp rope designed to break easily, had been improperly replaced for financial reasons by an elastic nylon rope. When the rope was pulled taut by the ship, it stretched and tore loose a large metal cleat that had been fastened to the ship's wooden hull. The cleat then sailed through the crowd of waiting guests, striking a cast member, Dawson, and his wife, Liu Vyong. Disney cast member Christine Carpenter underwent dramatic surgical operations for the laceration she received in the accident, while Liu Vyong was left with permanent facial disfiguration. 2 days after the incident, it was determined that the blow Dawson received had left him brain dead. He died after his family made the decision to disconnect his life support. As a result of the accident, Dawson's son and grandchild, who were witness to the tragedy, both suffer now from post-traumatic stress disorder, and probably won't be offering Disney their patronage anytime soon. After this incident, Disney became subject to much criticism due to its alleged policy of restricting outside medical personnel in the park to avoid frightening visitors, as well as for the fact that the employee in charge of the ship at the time had not been trained in its operation. The Anaheim Police Department also received criticism due to their slow response time. This resulted in Disney reinstating the use of lead foremen on most rides, and the Anaheim Police Department placing officers within the park. As the first guest death in Disneyland's history that was not attributable to any negligence on the part of the guest, Disney was fined by OSHA and settled a lawsuit brought about by the victim's family for an estimated amount of $25 million. Regardless of all the tragic events that have taken place, Disneyland's reputation has never become sullied for very long. It still ranks among the most popular destinations for family vacations in the entire country. I myself plan on taking a trip to the park very soon, and like all the rest of its visitors, I go there with the assumption that I will return with fond memories, countless pictures, and a lighter wallet. And if in the unlikely event that I don't return, rest assured that I went doing what I love. For Rollins TV, I'm Ian Rollins. Take a walk. Through the gate you go and never stop. Past junk food stores and mascots. Copyrighted friends on every block. and watch employees grow, more disgruntled as you go through the streets. A goofy haunted mansion on a hill with ghosts of failed attractions. All that money lost, it does seem tragic. You've yet to see some magic. Disneyland. In a shop, broadcast of a dead man on TV conveys his manifesto. Grand ideas abandoned long ago for profits garish glow. Disneyland. Hours in line and the sun's going down. A theme song blares from above. The one you loved, you loved that song till you were forced to hear that song all day long. Fireworks, through exhausted bloodshot eyes you see them all from 50 feet away. That's as close as you are going to get to end your day. Disneyland.